All right, everybody. Hi, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. It's really a treat again to be here with our Higher Education Subcommittee with Madam Co-Chair Rodriguez. We wanted to jump right in to today's hearings. This is, we've been together a number of times. It's great to see so many familiar faces. So we're going to, in the interest of time and full presentations from our panelists, as well as questions from committee members, skip introductions for all in the audience at this point. And with that, we're going to go directly beginning with Mr. May and then going from there. So, Mr. May, if you'd like to kick us off, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Joe May, Chancellor Emeritus of Dallas College and a consultant with HCM Strategist, which is supported by the Lumina Foundation, which was a part of our state policy work, and we've been involved with the state of New Mexico for many years. So I'm new to that, but I was 29 years as a CEO of either a chancellor or president of colleges in Texas. Ran the Colorado Community College system for many years, and then the Louisiana Community College system in the aftermath of Katrina. I've been really asked to talk about, I think, three things here as we look at what's happening. One, kind of what's going on nationally in terms of higher education, particularly from, I think, an enrollment perspective, but also programmatically what we're seeing out there and what the implications are, to zero in on the concept of efficiency. And I do think that there is an opportunity that exists right now to really kind of do some things differently with the support of legislative bodies and others to make that happen, and then hopefully be able to share some additional thoughts and questions as we get there. I assume that you've got a slide deck that looks hopefully similar to what I have in my hand, and we'll do that. As we get started and really kind of talking about, I didn't use this word in the title, but I almost would prefer to say enrollment shifts are occurring and that are really reflecting the student preferences that we're seeing in many times by our current data collection methodologies is showing a decline. That does not necessarily mean that students aren't getting some type of post-secondary education, but they are shifting how they're doing that. And we're seeing that differently, and I think that that's playing out in states. And I know, Connor, you're going to talk about specifically New Mexico as it relates to that. Kind of put it in perspective, this is not new. And as I state here, we've really seen since 2011 an overall decline in tracked higher ed enrollment through the National Student Clearinghouse data, that being down about 12.3%. Averages hide a lot of things within that, because we see some institutions down significantly more than that, while others actually increased. In fact, one segment grew by 47% during that time, and I'll kind of talk a little bit about who those are and what they're doing that's there. I looked at the most recent data that we have, and in terms of spring 2022 year over year, enrollment is down about 4.1%. This follows a 3.5% in 2021, a two-year drop of about 7.4%. So while there's been a decline, it had been pretty gradual until the COVID hit, and then we began to see that line decline much more sharply than it had in the past. Virtually all the losses are in undergraduates. Graduate enrollment has been much slower to react to that. So while overall about 7.4%, it's actually 9.4% when you get to the undergraduates. As you start to get to specific populations within that group, you see even more. About half of that loss has occurred at community colleges, with seeing over 11% decline nationally with their students. And to a large extent, male minority students have virtually become non-existent at colleges and higher education. They've taken a much harder hit. And let me just maybe take a few comments as it relates to this. So when I say there's a shift, what I mean by that and what I see driving that is initially when we went into COVID, and in the middle of March of 2020, students went online. There really wasn't much choice that they had. They were within the institution. They chose that. And even as we got into the fall, into the next spring, the students that were enrolled with those institutions stayed with those institutions. But what started to happen is the longer institutions stayed online, the more students nationally began to shop institutions. And you have no way to track this data within your state because you're limited to New Mexico. But what we started seeing is a tremendous growth among the national online providers, such as Western Governors University, Southern New Hampshire University, others that are out there that were attracting students basically, I think, on price. And with the understanding that if they're going to take it online, they might as well shop around and do that differently. The other shift that we saw occur, and it happened almost immediately in March of 2020. At that time, I was chancellor of Dallas College, and suddenly I began to hear from legislators within the state of Texas wanting to know, Joe, what programs, what should students be going into now? What are the jobs that are in demand? What will they pay? And how can people who just lost their jobs quickly get upskilled to get into new jobs? As I said, I've been a CEO for nearly 30 years, and I was asked that question more in the last 2 years than I have in probably the rest of my career combined, because suddenly it's a lot more about jobs, I think, than it has in the past. That's become really top of mind, and I think part of that was just the sudden loss that occurred. And so this gets to the other group that we saw increase dramatically. And again, it's difficult to track the data in this, but there's a whole group of institutions called non-institutional providers. They do mainly IT certification around, say, Google IT Professional Support certification. They work in Salesforce certification. They do Microsoft. They do others. Those institutions grew by 47% during the last 2 years, really focusing on primarily what we would call non-credit certifications. And even within our own public institutions, I recall a conversation at Dallas where one of our vice presidents came to me and said, essentially, we've got a choice to make. We can either continue doing what we're doing now or shift to more non-credit with what the students need, even though we're going to lose state funding and it doesn't show up on the enrollment reports, and we're going to see an enrollment drop as a result of it. And I said, we have to do what people need in order to get the jobs. And I think those are some things that, as we think about the future, to just keep in mind with higher ed. And just to kind of emphasize this, during the crisis, we saw in certain areas what in fact was a workforce crisis, with traditional degrees and programs declining, except for computer science and psychology. I have no explanation for the psychology, so I maybe mental health related. I'm not sure what the what the driver is for that. But I do understand skilled trade programs and construction grew by 19.3%. Mechanics and repair up 11.5%. Precision production increased, and that includes mechatronics, automated manufacturing, that includes process technology, and then culinary grew as well during time. And what these things all have in common, I think, among public institutions, community colleges, and specifically, is that they're hand-on program. These really can't be done well remotely, and so those we tended to also see a shift that's there. And then I want to just spend a little bit of time on this really busy slide that kind of looks like this. And I was trying to kind of neutralize it, just decided that I would share with you because I know this. This is actually when, for my 8 years at Dallas College, this is what we developed as our workflow model from how we bring students in and how we ultimately get them into jobs along the way, whether they transfer. And I want to mention just a couple of things, and then I want to kind of highlight what's actually important. Upper left is really kind of how we brought students in out of high school in traditional models. So this is reflective actually of 107 high schools that we worked with, whether it be traditional enrollment, dual credit, early college high schools, P-TECs, or specific career pathways, and how we brought them in. The lower left hand are mainly adults. They could be formerly incarcerated. They could be incumbent workers that are out there. They could be individuals with English as a second language. They could be coming through our workforce board, other areas. But we were creating on-ramps for them to get through, and then ultimately go through the institution, either transfer with our great partners that we had, but in all cases ending up with one of our corporate employer partners that are there. So getting into this, and I want to talk a little bit about efficiency, because I don't think we often think of this, but I want to share with you and why we did this particular graph, because the things matter a little bit, but the dotted lines matter a whole lot more. And if you focus on the dotted lines, what you see there are really two things. You see places where failure occurs in either handoff and transitions between systems, whether it be K-12 into community college or university, higher ed into the world of work, but it's everywhere in between as to how we support that. So that creates opportunities to collaborate in ways that we might have before. As we said often in Dallas, again, an urban institution, we served about 125,000 students annually at Dallas College, is that we didn't need to invent public transportation, but we sure had better figure out how to own the partnership and be able to manage that and own that transition so that students didn't have to figure that out on their own. So as we get into this, what I would encourage you to really think about is that the dotted lines also have a second opportunity, and that's where I think real efficiency can occur within systems. This is representative. We actually identified about 800 different handoffs and transitions and exchange places, including systems within systems, so that even admissions itself can have so many steps that we can lose people in that process as we're going through that. And this has allowed a couple of things. One, collaboration, both, and I'll hit on some, but including sharing of services and responsibilities as we've gone about partnership and collaboration, figuring out where the leverage points are so that we can get more students to complete in a shorter amount of time at a lower cost. Clarify the pathways all the way through so that from day one, no matter where they start, they can see ultimately how they end up with a job that's there, and make that happen. So most of this, quite frankly, we didn't have to invent very much of. The things existed, but what we had to do was to get people to sit down together who had often been competitive and now get them to collaborate and agree to work jointly. So we created joint admission. I'll just use a real example with one. We operate 4 early college high schools that are teacher education. If you're not familiar, students will select to go into a program basically coming out of the 8th grade with us. We'll get them in the summer prepared for that pathway. We partnered with a university, University of North Texas, Dallas, that is our four-year partner with that effort. We began working with the students in the 9th grade, the 10th grade, and by the 11th grade, there are in their coursework for the teacher ed done jointly by and collaboratively with the university. They graduate from us with an associate degree. They move into seamlessly into the pathway for that. This year, in various programs, we graduated at Dallas 3,200 students with associate's degrees at the same time they graduated from high school. About 80% of those were in applied science areas, so since I picked early college high school because that's the one that's not, the P-TECH and the others are all around technology with industry partners. And it's really that collaboration that creates efficiency, the sharing of resources, the bringing things to the table in very different ways than we have in the past. Also want to kind of mention too, on the pathway side, we've partnered on that side with a lot of community groups, such as construction organizations, those that are working with formerly incarcerated, others where we partner with them to also, very similar. In this case, we're offering non-credit credentials that do lead to a credit pathway. So we've identified 6 pathways, of which each of them had 3 non-credit credentials on the front end of that, tying into a pathway that can ultimately get them all the way through to associate degree or bachelor's or whatever. These, again, are primarily in the applied tech area, a lot in the construction area, a lot in healthcare, a lot, although we do some in business in that space. Great partners in that, again, with with companies like Amazon Web Services, Google, others that are really right now pretty hungry for people with those certifications, and we'll put them to work. But all that together does increase efficiency. And I think sometimes we think, because of state funding, these as independent silos, but when in reality, the students are the same. They're just trying to navigate through to get a better job and life. So let me move on with that and kind of talk a little bit about, I think, some things to just take in mind for the state of New Mexico and looking at improving efficiency. I do think charting business processes, as I just kind of demonstrated there with Dallas, about what's out there, what that looks like, and how that can happen, can really be eye-opening in terms of where just some logical connections or fumbles or that could easily be handled. I mean, you manage a transition where you're losing 20% of the students in the handoff, and you can reduce that down. You've just increased your efficiency tremendously in that process, and that's just by paying attention to that one dotted line that's there. I also think that one of the challenges, and again, having been in state systems, had boards appointed by the governor, others in the state, had locally elected boards, served in all types. Honestly, we've got leaders today that know they need to make some very difficult decisions. They need to change what types of programs they're offering. They need to change their delivery methodology. They need to change and consolidate programs. They need to eliminate programs. They need to partner with other institutions about sharing services and making that happen. But I'm going to be honest, many of them don't feel like anyone has their back in that process. And as soon as they step out there, every program, every service, everyone has some constituent that is often unhappy with that. And one of the ways I think that can offset that is at the state level, look at financial incentives for doing that type of work, for working together. That gives a level of blessing on it that it's if it's just me at the campus level that I don't have. So those are some things I would encourage you to think about. And then I guess I'd kind of leave you, with a couple of things that just observed here. I like what I see with the chess initiative or collaborative that's with shared services. It's, I think, in the early stages here in New Mexico, but the Collaborative for Higher Education Shared Services just honestly makes a lot of sense. And you're able to leverage resources that, quite frankly, end up being duplicated without it. And looking at what they're doing, there's not a single thing there that needs to be duplicated across institutions. There's no reason why that those can't be shared. I also think that what's going on with the longitudinal data and the data system work that's taken place, looking at that, is also going to be helpful. You know, one of the things that we're struggling with right now nationally is just a lack of data, of clarity. Our data has been structured very, very narrowly. The standard federal reporting is the IPEDS report, where we all roll our data up to create the national picture. They are about to start collecting this year non-credit data that's out there, because they realize there's just a big gap in terms of what's happening. Then I think another just logical are collaborations that are already going on here around dual credit, but figure out how to leverage that work that's in place and really support that work in new ways. And then I'll just kind of lead, what we're seeing with Illumina Foundation, others, that right now there's a lot of change going on. There's a lot of transition there, but this really means there's real opportunities that have never existed before to do some things differently. And what I really see are kind of two things. Some trying to figure out how they can do things differently and leverage their previous investment, knowing that the future is going to look different, or they're just attempting to buy time, hoping things will eventually get to normal, which I don't think that's going to happen. I really think that what we're seeing is a permanent shift in terms of how people are engaging, and I really do think this is a time to really reinvent our institutions in new ways. There's a lot of that going on in New Mexico. I think the trick is to support that and to realize that as we see these shifts occurring, we've got to adjust our operations to really reflect the needs of both individuals, employers, and what our communities are going to need to grow and to be stronger in the future. So happy to answer questions, Mr. Chair, or I'm not sure how you want to proceed with that.
Thank you very much, Mr. May. We're going to go through all the presentations, then we'll go straight to committee questions. We'll go next to Mr. Jorgensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Connor Jorgensen. I'm the LFC analyst for higher education. I'm just going to go through some of the high points on this brief. You'll find it in your binders behind tab J. And the first thing I'd like to touch on is a little bit about enrollment. Mr. May talked about that over the past couple years. The first chart you'll see in the middle of page 1 shows the changes in higher education institution enrollment in New Mexico versus the United States. So you can see that blue line is the United States. It's down about 8.2% over the last decade. New Mexico has tripled the enrollment, more or less. We're down 23.4% on the head count. If you'll turn with me to page 2. So this story kind of changes a little bit depending on the sector we're looking at. So if you check out the graphs on the top of that page, on the left-hand side, you can see that 2-year enrollment history. And what we're looking at there is a decline in New Mexico enrollment that is significant and that reflects that national average. So New Mexico and the nation have both lost about 30% enrollment in that 2-year sector over the last 10 years. When you look over to the right on the 4-year sector, that's where the New Mexico experience really diverges from that of the nation. The nation as a whole is up 17% in that public 4-year sector. New Mexico's down 19%. If you now look at there's the chart in the middle of the page on the left, higher education enrollment projections. So the legislature has And institutions have obviously been aware that the enrollment picture has not been looking great for New Mexico higher education institutions. This last year, the legislature included a requirement in the General Appropriations Act that said all higher education institutions have to provide an enrollment management plan in order to receive the full allocation of the budget. I'm happy to report every one of the institutions turned that plan in, and there will be no funding withheld as a result of that. So the new news here is in that chart. Mr. May talked about that return to normal. So what we're looking at in that new chart, those solid blue bars for 2020 or 2017 and 2021, that's our previous experience. The dashed bars are the projections for 2025 and 2027. As far as the plans go, they're expecting about a 10.5% enrollment increase by 2027. And you can see that even if we hit the goal, even if the institutions hit that goal, that would leave us around 44,000 students fewer than the institutions had at their peak enrollment. So that question of will we return to normal or what is normal, I think is spoken to in this chart. The next thing, very briefly, I'd like to just touch on funding. You can see the graph on the bottom of the page there. There's numerous different funding sources for higher education institutions. The biggest slice of that pie is state money that comes in and accounts for about 36%. If we turn to page 3, we can actually look at how this has changed over time. So that table there on the top of the page is showing us total instruction and general appropriations for higher education institutions. And what we can see is that those various revenue types have changed at really divergent rates. So, for example, tuition is up 5.4%, but federal revenue is actually down by 8.1%. State appropriations have covered some of that shortfall, and they're up 14%. The real big winner here is the local revenue. But also keep in mind that that revenue is restricted pretty much to, that's your community college revenue. And so overall, over the last decade, higher education revenue has increased by 4.3%. And anytime we think about something on a time frame as long as a decade, I think the question of spending power, purchasing power is at play. And so when we look at inflation over that same time period, it came out to about 21.2%. So the difference in purchasing power for higher education institutions over the last decade has actually shrunk by about 14%. If you'll turn with me to page 4, we did an analysis of the staffing patterns at higher education institutions. And what we found out is that over the last decade, the institutions have shed around 4,000 jobs. I think that's about 17% or so of total employment. But when you disaggregate the numbers, you see that the distribution of those job reductions is focused on part-time employees. So what you see at the bottom of that chart, that solid blue line, 60% of part-time staff positions have been lost. Part-time faculty is down 37%. When we look at the full-time positions, though, full-time staff positions are down 5.9%. Full-time faculty positions are actually up by 1.4%. And so what is this really telling us, right? We have declining enrollment, we have declining staffing, and so how do we estimate where higher education institutions are relative to their national peers? The most recent data we have for this is from 2018, and you can see the table in that sidebar is showing the faculty to student ratios, student to faculty ratios for New Mexico versus the US. And New Mexico is slightly higher than the national average on those ratios. The next category we look at, generally speaking, is administrative spending. This was a big issue back there was a 2017 LFC evaluation of higher education cost drivers, and this was one of the tables that we used back then based on 2016 data, and we've now updated it. So the ratio of administrative spending to instructional spending has been benchmarked by the American Council of University Trustees and Alumni. And so we can see those ratios in those columns. And in 2016, for example, if you look across top row UNM, that ratio was 19.1%. Over the next 5 years, it changes slightly and it goes up to 20.1%. The national benchmark for an institution of UNM's description is 17%. So overall, I think what we're seeing is for the research universities and for two-year schools, the administration ratio, the spending ratio has increased. It's fallen for comprehensives, but in both cases, it's close to the national benchmark. There's a couple of exceptions. That 2017 evaluation also found that in the 2011 to 2016 timeframe, administrative spending was the fastest growing spending category in higher education institutions. So the update that you can see in the table on the right-hand side shows that that remained the case, but that administrative spending increased by 1.4% over 5 years. The next category was student support spending, which increased by 1%, but overall, the expenditures for higher education institutions were down. And so what does that mean, right? The budget has stayed relatively flat. The expenditures are falling. So if you look at the table in the middle of the page, institutional fund balances by institution type, we can see that as of FY21, there was $260 million in fund balances. These are unrestricted ING balances reported by higher education institutions. That's about a 70% growth over the last 5 years. And as a percent of expenditures, we're looking at about a quarter of overall ING spending. So that's a little overview of enrollment history and financing. Lastly, I'd like to give just a quick example on efficiency. And one of the things, this was reported to us by CNM. And CNM has been trying to understand how to create more efficiencies in their course delivery and at their institution. I think we've seen a number of institutions reporting different things, but CNM's jumped out at me. So what CNM reported is that from the 2017 to the 2021 time period, they had their filled course seats, so the number of students actually sitting in a course, that number shrank by 25%. Meanwhile, faculty shrank by 10%. So that's creating a gap, and what it's leading to is courses that are being delivered to students, but they're being delivered undersubscribed. The tricky issue for an institution like CNM is if you stop delivering those undersubscribed courses, what does it do to that student's trajectory to graduation and eventually award of certificate? But CNM did estimate that just by running those courses at capacity rather than undersubscribed would save the institution about $1 million a year. And a number of institutions have other spending reductions. I don't want to go into them here. I'd like to turn it over to President Stokes now to talk about UNM.
On the note of spending reductions. Well, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. And thank you, of course, for all you do for the state of New Mexico. My role on this panel basically is to take these broader concepts about the challenges that are facing higher education and talk about a few of them as it relates to what my university, University of New Mexico, is doing. So I'm going to talk about efficiencies that have taken place and many more that are planned. I'm going to talk about some things we've learned about the effectiveness of various instructional modalities, and then I'm going to finish with a brief look at enrollment. So on the second slide, talking about efficiencies in employment and related to faculty, I thought we'd start with efficiency. We have at UNM reduced our faculty size overall by 8.5% over the last 5 years. But as mentioned here, the biggest decrease that we saw in faculty is actually among those temporary faculty. As you know, many of our full-time faculty, many of them are on contracts on the tenure track, and so the reductions there for UNM are actually a 1.2% reduction in our regular faculty. And I do want to note that for the Council of Presidents, the four-year institutions, in fact, there has been collectively a reduction in full-time faculty of 2%. So I think down from, we were at 3283 in 2016, and we're at 3216 in 2020. I do think I want to note a point of pride, I think, for the four-year institutions, and that is the diversity of our instructors compared to our regional peers. We have about 23.6% Hispanic representation. Our regional peers average about 6.8% in Hispanic representation among faculty. So we clearly have our work to be done in this area, but we have seen some changes. On the next slide, you'll see the same kind of thing for staff. Across our campuses since 2017, our regular numbers are there in red and the temporary in gray, just like on the previous slide. We've had a 12.3% reduction in staff overall. But again, it was the temporary staff that were reduced most significantly, and it was a 1.4% reduction for regular staff. On the next slide, I want to tell you a little bit about what this looks like in comparison in a project that we've been working on. You know, I think our reduction is pretty substantial, and you'd expect that given that we do have a drop in our enrollment numbers, and so those who are student-facing, student service serving, you'd expect to see some changes. But we are really thinking about how to most effectively allocate our resources. And so we have a project that's currently underway, huge report, still in draft form, so that we can evaluate our labor costs using an apples-to-apples comparison. So we are partnering with a group called Helio Campus. It's a benchmarking consortium that was born out of the University of Maryland Global Campus there, focused on university analytics. And it's built specifically to serve higher education. And they operate on a membership model. So rather than relying on consulting contracts. So the work is really, I think, collaborative within the participants with Helio Campus. And I will say, this is a deep incursion into business intelligence and our institutional analytics. And we're only at the beginning, but I wanted to share a little bit about what we have here. This includes many other institutions, and some of those that we're benchmarking against are here but not named on the slides. They're purposely not named. You only see us. And this is for a specific spend related to administrative intensity. So compared to our peer institutions that include places like Colorado, Arizona, Texas Tech, University of Utah, and some others, we were second lowest in terms of our administrative costs. And so this is, just one benchmark that we have been able to see so far. There's a lot more that we can do, and this is really looking at labor costs for administrative functions versus our overall labor costs. On the next slide, you see some further information we gained from Helio, our work with Helio Campus. And on this slide, you see several areas of administration typical at universities, including development and communications, human resources, et cetera. And we can see that there are already some efficiencies that we could gain if we do further analysis, which we are doing and will be engaged in. It breaks down these standard functional areas and lets you know what proportion of them at UNM compared to the other institutions, their average, what proportion of them are centralized, what proportion are decentralized, and then there are smaller numbers that are related to, I guess, shared functions and then external functions. So UNM is on the left, the peer group is on the right, and what you can see is that, for example, in communications on the second row from the top, about 90% of our communications work is decentralized, and our peers have about 76% that is centralized. And I do see this as an area where we could potentially be more effective and efficient if we look at a change in the way in which we deliver that particular function. There's some other areas that I think are worth looking at as well from this. Research administration, our finance, and our general administration are areas that we will do deeper dives to consider what we might do to gain greater efficiencies. Now, the next slide, I feel compelled to say, this is not UNM data, okay? This is an example of the kinds of analyses we can do at UNM with this huge data report that we currently have. And, you know, I see that our work with Helio Canvas could help us think about a number of things. How we might target administrative areas for budget allocations, how we might improve our strategic alignment, how we might evaluate our academic resources, our resource allocations to various academic units, and then we want to do better data-driven staffing decisions. So for demonstration purposes, what you have in front of you is a graph that puts the operational functions of student services into 4 quadrants based on how much investments have been made and how effective they are considered to be. And there are, you know, lots of things that go into actually defining the effectiveness. That will, of course, vary by whatever that function is, if it's admissions or tutoring, but those things are things that, formulas that get created. And then you can evaluate the extent to which one of your areas like admissions might be resourced too much for what you're getting for it. Or in this case, this is one, if you look at the amount, the lower investments with higher outcomes are in the upper left quadrant. Those are the ones you would showcase. I notice there's nothing absolutely in that category for this example. The ones with high levels of resources, but with low outputs end up in that bottom quadrant. That's what you call reimagine or rethink. Obviously, there's an issue, potentially an issue there to be investigated. Most of the bubbles fall into kind of in between in the streamline quadrant, where you have relatively high resources that are committed when compared to peers with a just above average effectiveness comparison. So if you look at that large green circle, which is admissions, the benchmark effectiveness is about 60% of peers. The investment is about 90%. Average is around 100. So this is a place where you might actually put in some resources to increase effectiveness. But looking at career services in the middle on the far right, the investment at 130 of peers, but just above the peer average for performance, that could require some streamlining. My point in showing you this really is to say that we've started looking at all of these things at our university with a purpose to really figure out what to invest in, how to be more effective and efficient, what to streamline, and really what to reassess and reimagine. And this is the tip of the iceberg. there are so many things that we can do with a database with all of this information that can help us ask and answer a lot of questions about how we might improve ourselves. You know, I wondered who you guys were smiling at, and I'm like, I had to look around.
They only smile at Western people, not you and them people.
Okay, all right. So, on the next slide, you know, most of what we talk about, a lot of what we talk about is related to gaining efficiencies in our human resources, because what we know is that, you know, our biggest expenditures are actually on people. No question about it. But we also hear and know about the issues of facilities and space utilization. That's clearly been brought up here. And I think all of us have recognized that these have been and can be very heavy lifts for universities. So we are recognizing that, and we're at work figuring out how to better manage our assets and reduce our footprints to reflect our mission. But I do want to also acknowledge, you know, for us, it isn't just about teaching and learning. You know, we have we're a major research university. We have lots of activity related to that research. And then you know that we have an incredible amount of patient care. And so the picture is a little more complicated than it might be for an institution with a more narrow mission, just focused on teaching and learning. But we have implemented what we call our asset management plan. It helps us use our resources effectively in a more responsible manner. And this initiative is we're trying to upgrade and integrate our facility database, optimize how we use our space, reduce our space needs and our building inventory, and ensure we have high-quality environments for our updated framework plan. I also say that, you know, right now we are examining applications for those that have bid to do a comprehensive facility, a comprehensive master plan for the institution. So, and that includes all of our properties everywhere throughout the state. In this, you actually see some planning for facilities at UNM that we're expecting to transition. You'll see the title of the project, the description, the year of the project. Funding will be requested because we're talking about things that actually require resources to actually accomplish. But in this table, you'll find that we're talking about a reduction of about 285,000 square feet. And you see the size of some of those facilities. So this is a major undertaking, but there'll be a lot more discussion about this going forward. On the next slide, of course, mentioned earlier, a key element of efficiently and effectively deploying our space is about classroom and course section management. So we heard a little bit about that, efficiency of what's in sections, the fill rates, and we continue to do deep analysis on this. And I'll tell you that our analysis has led us to consider 6 different major recommendations. First is trying to optimize our classroom inventory, which really is trying to line up our inventory configuration with our needs. And that's what this chart's about, and I'll tell you a little more about this chart in just a moment. But I wanted to tell you about the other things that we're also looking at. We're looking at centralizing the scheduling of more of our space. A lot of space management takes place out in the departments and is under the control of departments. It's a tough thing to do a lot of times at universities, in my experience, but centralizing that really gives us more control that allows us to be more effective and efficient in the ways in which our courses are assigned, our classrooms are used. Prioritizing the alignment of section size and room capacity. The mismatches here unnecessarily create low percentage used capacity. If you take a class that you were only going to put 30 students in to begin with and put them in a 100-seat classroom, what does that look like? You know, we're talking about expanding the section scheduling envelope. We do have times of the week when our classrooms can be empty or they're underutilized, days of the week, times of the day. We want to use data-driven enrollment patterns to forecast our needs for classrooms and adjust them accordingly. We want to enhance and add more active learning spaces because we know the data are clear that active learning spaces are really essential for the most effective learning in many, many areas. And then we want to standardize the room functionality with a common suite of technology. So related to optimizing our inventory, this particular graph, the gray line shows you what our actual inventory is for classrooms with different capacities. So if you, the number of classrooms is, on the y-axis, what you see at the bottom is the number we actually have in each of these types of seat capacity classrooms. But then the gray ones has our actual inventory, and then the other 3 bars associated with them tell you, over 3 semesters, how much of that was actually used. And so you see we have a lot of classrooms, 129 spaces of inventory for classrooms that hold 21 to 40 people. But over 3 semesters, we actually only needed 50 to 60 of those. So we've got some work to do trying to reevaluate and redeploy the ways in which our classrooms are configured. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. The great news for our students is that, smaller classes are generally, in many cases, the most effective experiences for our students. And so we are doing this for classrooms. We're also doing this work, though, for teaching labs and for office space. And on the next slide, you'll see just some examples of efficiencies in space and facilities. It's an example of what we're talking about creating active learning spaces. These are, spaces where we could configure them for 20 to 30 students or so. And we're doing this work already in terms of a space analysis with our largest college, College of Arts and Sciences. They have about 740,000 square feet. Our College of Education and Human Sciences and the School of Architecture. And so this is ongoing work. Now I'm going to switch to online, and I'm also going to try to speed up a bit because I know we want to have plenty of time for the committee to ask us questions. But I have heard a huge topic of interest has been impact on remote learning, what it's done to students, and you can see here also questions about how our infrastructure has evolved. I want to be clear, this particular slide is really about our growth in enrollments related to our really standardized online classes. This isn't reflective of the emergency move to online at all that took place in fall of 2020. These are our online courses, and what we see is that there is growth in online as we've come, I'm not even saying as we've come out of the pandemic, whatever we're doing right now. It is clear that our students are more and more interested in online, and you see that growth reflected here from fall of 2016 to fall of 2021. And we have about 20,000 enrollments, about 10,000 students who are taking a couple courses apiece in these really effective online environments. On the next slide, though, speaking of what have we learned, what can we see from what happens when we go remote? And this, on the next slide, effectiveness in teaching and learning, this is a comparison of what happened in fall of 2020. Now, what you see here are kind of 3 different modalities. On the far left is the face-to-face, and that is divided up into lower division courses and upper division courses. So kind of often the general education versus what students are taking in their major. In the middle, you see the more synchronous remote classes. So there's a set day and time that students enter the online environment to do their course. And then the asynchronous, where there's really no scheduling. It's kind of do this when you do it. And what you see here, and again, they're divided up into upper division and lower division courses. What you can see for fall of 2020 is that in our upper division courses, our students do better. Their fail rates are significantly less than they are in our lower division courses. And, you know, I had a lot of personal conversations with students while they were in that online environment, and I heard them say the things that probably are reflective here. Our first and second year students, or those in those lower division courses, they just weren't ready for this issue of structure. Probably some age and maturation, just time in higher ed and learning how to better use time and study appropriately. So, and so we see some significant issues between lower division and upper division. And I will say too, to note for this, you know, these are classes that went remote. So we had very little in-person classes in fall of 2020. This is not data for our specialized online permanent programming that has peer review and is a very sophisticated online program. This is the emergency move. So not many people, not many classes actually within the in-person. But you can see that there's a big difference in fail rates for online, synchronous but asynchronous in particular, in the lower division. The next slide, you see fall of 2021. Here, I will say there are a lot more face-to-face. We had a lot more classes come back in person. And so, you know, you can see the only trend that I would say still seems to hold a bit is that we get much better outcomes in upper division courses. But I will tell you, fall of 2021, even in person, there was a lot of turmoil, and you can see it reflected even in the online courses. So much was going on, and so there's a lot more to understand here. This is preliminary information. My point really is to let you know the extent to which we are trying to understand what it means to deliver education in different modalities. And what seems clear is that there is not a one-size-fits-all, that we are going to have to do a lot of work to really understand what is most effective for different groups of students, different learning styles, different experiences coming into the college environment. And so we will continue to do this work, but this is an example of the kinds of things we're considering. On the next slide, I'll make a shift to enrollment. And of course, this is another topic that Connor covered. And we know we have this ecosystem that we're working with. We will continue to focus on this for years to come. At UNM, our new first-year student cohorts account for about more than half of our undergraduate population at any particular time. And we have seen, and that's what this chart is intended to show a bit, is that if you get a smaller freshman class, your overall enrollments are going to decline as they go through the system over time. That is, it's just going to happen. So, and it lingers for years. I wanted to highlight, though, a little bit about our work and what it means. This chart that's here on the left shows our freshman class sizes in recent years since 2019. The charts on the left are really our demographic ethnicity breakdowns, and the large gray group are Hispanic. The next group is our white students, American Indian, and so on. It's really just to show you that as we have seen these changes, our relative proportions by ethnicity are remaining pretty stable. So the forecast on the right intentionally starts with that really high enrollment, that high capacity, what was it, 2014, our highest level. And we had large cohorts going through and then the major decreases. But as we model classes of 3,300 freshmen, which is where we project to be this year, the enrollment pretty drastically improves. And we'll not get to the record numbers as Connor mentioned, but you can see, depending upon various graduation rates, that we will see growth in enrollment over time, and that's what this is intended to share with you. And I will also say, it's not just about our first-year freshmen. That's a big part of our population, but we are really focused on growing transfer students as well. That's been a challenge with the drop in our community colleges, but even so, we are seeing growth in transfer students, and we expect to see some substantial growth in the fall of 2022. And since we got so much support for this, I do want to just say thank you. Nursing, we're trying to double the production of nurses. That will contribute to some of our enrollment growth as well. On the next slide, I thought people might be interested in the impact of the Opportunity Scholarship. This program certainly has potential, great potential to increase adult non-traditional students. We really saw that was diminished substantially as New Mexico recovered from that last recession. But what you see here is our current estimated awards, assuming everyone would be, I assume you'd be interested in seeing what this looks like at an institutional level. So what you see at the bottom of this graph is the amount of money actually offered to students, and then how many students in each of these categories have been offered these varying amounts of money. And this is for this next academic year. I'll just do the math for you. It's about $39 million in awards to about 6,800 students. Now, we don't know yet where this is all going to land, but I wanted to let you know where we are with that. And on the next slide, you'll see a breakdown. About 3,800 on the next slide are continuing students, and about 3,000 are new students. And some of the smaller awards are likely to be for the fees from some of our students who are on the lottery scholarship, eligible after their first semester, some part-time students. It's hard to say. This is a work in progress. We don't know where this is going to land exactly when we get to August and we're counting our students, but this tells you what, some of what it could look like. So. But again, very preliminary. I want to switch really quickly, and I'm going to go through these slides very fast. We have really been focused on student success. We are trying to improve our graduation rates, our retention and graduation rates, get our students through with their degrees. The sooner they can get their degrees, the better able they are to start earning a living and the less debt they will accumulate. So one of the first things that we are really focused on this fall is on student mental health. We have some serious issues. It's a nationwide issue. And last week at the Council President's Retreat, we had our director of our SHAC, our Student Health and Counseling Center, speak to everyone about some things that could have a real impact for our students who are coming back this fall. And this is just a list of things that she thinks would be most impactful in terms of our students' mental health, which will improve outcomes at every level for any institution. What I'm pleased about is that Dr. McIver is the founding organizer for a group called the New Mexico Association of University and College Counseling Directors, and this group came up with these things as things that we could do. And I wanted you to be aware that this work is going on. We've also got a lot of things going on with assistance to students. This next slide focused on some of the work that's done in our Center for Teaching and Learning for our students. This slide just describes some of the types of interventions that we make to assist our students to be successful. And you see how much tutoring we give, how many of our students tend to use it. What I want to really wanted to share is that these interventions make a difference. Students that are involved in these kinds of services actually do better. They're more likely to graduate, and they have higher GPAs. And here's a lot more information about some of the specific things, but I'll leave it at that. The next thing is something that's part of the next slide is about the Student Experience Project, which really is, we became partners with this. It was related to a grant to promote academic engagement and increase equity. And what we've discovered, and we've institutionalized this because we've discovered some really positive outcomes for some of these low-cost interventions to try to improve the experience of students as students. And what you see here are a number of faculty and colleges that are involved in this project. And we've seen an increase in positive student experiences across our demographic groups. We're seeing an increase in grades. We're seeing an increase in, a decrease actually in failures and withdrawals from classes. And we're seeing that, that students who participate in this, who are STEM, retain in STEM at much higher rates than those who are not involved in classes that are focused around the student experience. And then on the next slide, additional student support is part of another program that has had funding. It's Peer Learning Facilitators Program. A lot of our Native American students have actually served as peer facilitators, and they're talking about the positive experience and promoting their leadership. And these are all things that promote persistence and success in our gateway courses. And finally, last slide, except for questions, we have an NSF grant from the National Science Foundation grant to really try to expand the availability of research experiences for students earlier in their careers. Students who are engaged in research fare far better in terms of all the outcomes. And so this is part of a program to get students more involved with what a research university really has to offer our undergraduates, and that is the opportunity to work with faculty and engage in the research. And this is especially helpful for students in STEM. And with that, I will pause for questions.
Thank you very much, President Stokes. Thank you to Mr. May, Mr. Jorgensen. We're going to go straight to questions, and we're going to ask Representative Chatfield to start us off.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question goes back to something that we talk about every time this group comes together, and that is that in the trades programs, the certificates, they're counted as a dropout, like you didn't finish school or whatever. When a lot of these students, their purpose when they went there was to get a certificate, not to get a four-year degree. Have we made any progress in changing the way we look at these certificates so that they are considered a completion instead of a?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Representative Chatfield, I think there's a couple parts to that question. When we started off talking about the head counts for higher education institutions, it's important to remember those are credit-bearing students. So we've seen a lot of growth in the non-credit side, but those were not counted. And neither are those awards counted in the funding formula. Many of those non-credit awards.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, that is the problem. We are looking at funding, and we need to look at how many people completed their goal, which is a certificate, when we look to funding those institutions. So it was a great reiteration of the problem. What is the solution?
Mr. Chairman, right now, funding formula discussions are ongoing. We have Dr. Rommel here from higher education. It's the next item on the agenda. And I think Dr. Rommel can certainly speak to where the funding formula tech group is at.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Representative Chatfield. Next, Chairman Windes.
Thank you. And Joe, you know, this is really, should be the Bible for the universities, the way I look at it, because I can tell you that my kid, right, it was just exactly in your alignment. You know, he graduated from UNM with 2 associates, right? Went off and got a bachelor's, and now he's going to New Mexico State. And so, all online. A majority of it online. He graduated in 2020, and he's made those adjustments. But there's some questions, and I just want to ask you this, and I have 2 boys.
Happy to do, Senator.
Why are male students not not going into the classroom.
Yeah, and I wish I knew fully the answer to that. We've actually been part of surveying that on an ongoing basis about every 6 weeks as we're looking at the transitions that are occurring. To point out, males have actually been in decline for about 30 years in higher education. So this is not a short-term trend, but what we did see was a pretty massive acceleration, particularly of minority males that have occurred over the last 2 years. We do think part of that is actually related to the need for technology that's there. This came up a lot. Many of the students that we're seeing, particularly, and I'm going to generalize here that may not fit your situation in New Mexico, but in urban areas, they don't actually have a permanent place to live. They're not homeless, but they're moving around, which Wi-Fi becomes a problem, and many of those students had relied on the campus as their source for Wi-Fi for even their online courses that they were taking. And even providing things like hotspots and other things made that difficult. One thing that gets missed in the technology discussion, not to jump into it, but it's very difficult when you're using the wireless devices to do that. Upload speeds are so slow, and when you're relying on some of the things we went to initially were Zoom and other technologies, that it just simply wouldn't handle that in the process. I do think it's also a cultural issue, and I get back to the collaboration piece. I think we can turn this around. And I actually want to kind of key on something that was said earlier related to the technical program areas. By collaboration more with K-12 in some of these areas where we're really supporting that transition to high school to college, not simply ending high school, find your way to college, but manage that much more tightly than we've have in the past. I would say the other piece of it really kind of gets to what I think is one of the most overlooked equity issues today in higher education. And that does relate to some of the short-term certificates, trades, but others as well, because when they're beyond less than a year in length right now under the current federal aid rules, you have to pay out of pocket. And so that means that you've got to be able to do that. And then if you're going to pay out of pocket for those programs, unfortunately, if you're minority male, you're going to be working while you're doing that, and you're less likely to see because there is no aid to support that effort. Then we do get into the gap that we really don't track that. And New Mexico is no exception. I've looked across the country. No state adequately, I would say a little bit. Kentucky does it, and Virginia are probably doing it better with the non-credit certifications. Louisiana's doing it better these days, but that's one that gets missed. And so we're missing, I think, opportunity for males in general, particularly that is in a very attractive pathway ultimately into higher education or through some of those short-term certificates where they can work and earn all at the same time. We had a little phrase that we've used that for many of these students, it's clear they want to enroll in a job, not just in terms of a program. So how do we connect those, I think, are incredibly important.
And that kind of leads me into page 10 on your program, because I've been hearing this out of a lot of kids because they kind of hang around mine. This credentialing engine, right, or these certificates or these fast-tracked IDs, like if you're going to fast-track to be a nurse, right, how quickly can we get you there instead of you going through a 4-year institution and saying, I don't really need all the other classes I may have to take. But I just want to get that certificate.
Yes,
I want to get
and I'll use one from my previous institution, Dallas College. So what we began to do was something we call Certificate First on many of our pathways, with the idea being we knew these students were coming out of backgrounds that they had to work. They had no option to do that. And so we partnered, I'll just use one, our biggest one happened to be with Google, with the Google IT Professional Support Certificate, which is a 6-month certification where the average starting salary in Dallas, I don't know what it would be here, but probably the line was $53,000 a year, and we had virtually 100% placement with those, but those students continued on. That was a non-credit certificate, but they continued on then with their program because those certificates have a shelf life. And very quickly, they lose value if you're not continuing your educational pursuit and growing in that process. So it's not one and done. It really is thinking about it as a continue. And I think part of the problem now, we do silo those. We say, this is over here. And let me tell you what's also happened that's troubling to me about it is that we have seen a tremendous growth in these programs. Some are in partnership with universities. I don't know if you partner with 2U or some of the other groups that are doing that. But many of these, like Flatiron, General Assembly, or others that are out there, are for-profit, and they charge a hefty fee for that certificate, which could easily be offered within community colleges and universities at a lower cost because of the state and local investment within that to make that happen. Many of them are taking a percentage of the students' wages after they graduate. They're offering it free, but they're tying it to wage earning going forward. Now, that has been up and growing at much faster than anything else in higher education for several years. I really think part of that is because it's off the state policy radar. It kind of the question earlier. It's not one of those things that's not tracked, and if you're not tracking, you don't know it exists, and therefore it doesn't show up. And I think these aren't different students that enroll ultimately in the University of New Mexico. They're the same people. They're just starting at a different place in life with a different opportunity. And so we need to really think of those as a continuum, not this group over here and this group over here, because ultimately they're really the same people.
And let me ask you this, I'm just assuming some of this stuff. When I received that certificate, right, that Google certificate in the six months program, I bet they enter the next certificate program, right, to achieve that next certificate. And
Well, their employer's going to pay for it at that point. Once they're there, they're going to get encouraged most of the time and supported in that effort. And a surprising a number of those individuals end up being promoted fairly quickly. We track that data pretty carefully, and we get to see kind of what happens to them. And it's pretty exciting to see someone going from mowing lawns, because you can do that in Texas, but as a living, but to making $53,000, supporting their family, and then able to continue their education. So,
I think just a few more questions, and anybody can answer them. I mean, we put in all these programs, nursing programs, doctors, right? I don't know how many kids I talk to, like, I'm waiting for a slot to get into the doctor program at UNM, right? New Mexico kids, and oh, I didn't qualify, I'm third on the waiting list, I'm second on the waiting list, and we push all this stuff, and then we don't have the slots for them. And the same thing goes with nursing, right? Same thing, I'm gonna use Gallup, right? All these kids wanna be nurses, but there's no slots, and we're pushing them in to do this because the tuition is free, and then the universities don't have the slots for them, and then we're just sitting there like, we want to entice this, but then the universities aren't putting them in.
and that is a policy issue that is not unique, but I think it's one that's worth discussion. I will also say, when you meet with healthcare providers, they'll point out they need phlebotomists as well, or others that have a very short-term certification. So there are multiple routes in. It's just there are actually about 52 very clear tracks that students can enroll in just to healthcare.
And President Stokes, do you want to add anything to Chairman, to the Representative Munoz's question?
Senator?
Sorry, Senator. I didn't want to give the
Thank you,
promotion
Mr.
that
Chair and
easily.
Senator
We're
Munoz.
going to the mine today.
We're getting the,
You know, I recognize the frustration with really going to scale to meet the needs of the state of New Mexico related to a number of health professions. So, you know, we do have plans in place and are actively increasing the number of nurses. So, but understand number of slots issue, but we are expanding that and having active discussions about ways in which we can increase physicians and other healthcare workers as well.
and Senator, if I might, do you have a sense of how many, can you put numbers to that? So with the investment, do you have an expected number of slots?
You know, the number on the nursing side is double, but that, if I remember correctly, goes from 128 to 244. And I know that is not sufficient to meet the needs for the number of nurses in New Mexico.
And Senator, to go, I think That's super helpful for what we're looking for, is both on trend, but also within what the numbers are, so that we're able to, so that's sort of, I know that's the specificity that you're asking for, Senator. I think we're excited, understanding that it can be incremental steps forward, but we're excited to receive that specificity back. Sorry, go ahead, please.
You're good, you're good. No, that's very important to us to see how many slots are filling. I mean, in any industry that we're waiting for, and I'm looking at Gail because I've been on the phone every morning trying to find workers, right? At $25 an hour in Albuquerque, and it's just driving me nuts. But I think the other problem that we have in universities and stuff is, I'm not gonna say minority students, but all students have a problem. Our first-time college students or first-time kids going to college in their family have the hardest trouble navigating the system, right? How do I get in and how do I get help? And, you know, my parents aren't really helping me. Navigation is so key for their success when they're starting out. And I mean, just like the Google certificate, if that's a success that they can achieve in a 6-month period, then I see them continuing on. But how are we gonna fix that navigation problem when they're walking in there and they're saying, you know, my parents aren't here, they never went to this school, I'm the only one that can navigate. My high school counselor is the one that coached me into going to college and navigation. So I mean, that's a key thing. The other thing that kind of worries me is we're on a declining population through K through 12. You're on a declining population, but you're seeing an increase in students. But I don't know where we're making up the difference. Is it out of state? Where are those kids coming from, right? How are we targeting them? And then on your online stuff, I mean, I think I've said this before, right? We're gonna have to get competitive in New Mexico. And the president in MSU is shaking his head because he's heard me say this. My kid, who was a UNM student, had a UNM ID, we had a UNM email, couldn't take an online course because they said, oh, you're required to come on campus to do whatever the first year's training is or whatever. He did it at NMSU online a couple days ago. And so he gave up. So where did he go? He took an online course at NAU at half the price. So where did he end up going to school? NAU, because it was easier to navigate, it was half the cost, and the system worked so easy for him. And so he gave up on what he should have been pushing into New Mexico because of the troubles he had. And that's just, if I'm experiencing that, and my kids are experiencing that, and I'm hearing other kids experiencing that, then that's what's happening. And so that's one more thing. President Stokes, you said, like, and correct me if I'm wrong at any point, is when your freshman population comes in, it's 50% of your student population every single year. So 50% of those freshmen are dropping out their first year?
No, that's just the proportion of sorry, Mr. Chair and Senator Munoz. That's the proportion, if you look at the composition of our entire undergraduate enrollment, those students who came in as first-year freshmen are, that's the proportion.
Or 50% of that
More than,
population?
yeah.
Okay. I think that's it, but I say this all the time, and kids work differently and their minds are different, right? And us as industry, if we can target a program or certificate program, whether it's Google or plumbing, and we want our plumbers to have basic math, basic English, right? English 101, so they can read, and multiply, and we can get them out and have a quick program. Because not every kid's made to go to school for 4 years, right? If we can get them in the job market, and plumbers, I imagine they're probably 80 bucks an hour right now. I know what electricians are, they're 76 an hour, right? And if we get them any type of college education, any type of background, and we can do that in a 6-month program or a 12-month program and get them moving on, they're gonna be well off in this environment, I mean, working. And so I was really glad to see this. This is, because I live this, right? And it really seems to work, and it's just my kid, and other kids are different, but it seems to really well work. In the dual credit program, you are gonna be cut in half of what you're planning on a student leaving high school and saying you're having 4 years of college. Well, that kid now has 2 years already done, and you're only having your program for 2 years. It might be a small population, but it's going to affect a whole lot of it later on. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator. Next, we're going to go to Senator Correa Hemphill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And what I would like to ask President Stokes, thank you for your presentation. That was really interesting. You mentioned briefly the student experience. Can you elaborate a little bit about what that looks like, what that is, and how it's improving student outcomes?
So are you specifically asking about the student experience project?
The student
Okay,
experience project,
yes,
thank
yeah.
you.
So this is really an intervention into the classrooms with faculty that are participating in the program. We know that a lot of our students are first generation, more than 40%, and so it is helping, in part, helping faculty change their practices and the ways in which they perhaps communicate, the things that they put on their syllabi. One of the things that I heard about was something as simple as not referring to your office hours as office hours, because our students don't, they interpret the meaning of office hours to mean that's a time when you're in your office and not to be bothered. And so it is changing the ways in which faculty communicate with our students. Similar to what Senator Munoz is talking about,
Right,
the different
exactly.
language. They have something called creating a stuff happens policy. It allows students, for example, a no questions asked extension on a deadline. They have something called exam wrappers, where they build opportunities for students to have guided reflection on their assignments and their exams and everything else. They have created some inclusive stories and images. So it's working with the students to help them think about what they're engaged in, but it's also direct intervention in what faculty are doing to communicate with students. And those are some examples that I have. And normalizing the need for tutoring. So rather than tell students, if you're having trouble, go get the tutoring services, you instead say, the students who perform best are actively involved in these activities. It's just a shift in thinking. And what's amazing is that makes such a difference in the experience for students themselves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and President. I can see your passion for this. And what do you mean by low lift teaching?
They're easy things to do.
Ah,
They're really, they're so simple, and we never thought of it, so.
okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And President Stokes, how do students on the UNM campus pay for mental health support that they need right now? What does that look like?
I don't know all of the details. We have a student fee. Students pay a fee that helps support our student health shack. There is some payment. I believe there may be charges to insurance. So, but I couldn't tell you. I think it's based on ability to pay, but I couldn't tell you exactly what that looks like. But I'd be happy to get you that information.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and President. I do feel like that really needs to be looked into because my daughter attended UNM. She saw a psychologist there. It was quite expensive for her, and I just think that if we're creating those barriers or not eliminating those barriers to students being able to access the mental health support that they need, we're not really addressing the issue, and obviously students are limited in their income. And so thank you for those responses. And thank you, Connor, for your presentation. Do you have data on what the most popular trades are right now and what the best return on investment is in terms of people staying in New Mexico and getting paid a high rate where they can support a high-quality lifestyle and support their families?
Yes, Mr. Chair and Senator Hemphill. I think there's a couple issues with that. Right now, a number of the schools are tracking the actual certificates they're producing. So we can have access to those, and I can run those down for you and share them with the committee, of course. When it comes to the actual labor market outcomes of those certificates, that's where we have a really big problem with the data collection. And Mr. May alluded to this. So the legislature funded a longitudinal data system, the aim of which, in part, is to be able to track our students from basically education into workforce, and then see what the workforce outcome is. But that is an area that we have scant data on currently. So yes, we can get the number of certificates by certificate type, and I'll work on that in terms of the workforce outcomes. And that's also linked to the ROI. It's really hard we can't determine the ROI until we can know about employment rates and salaries, and we just don't know right now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Connor. Connor, do we have any information about how inflation and the increased cost of housing might impact enrollment on online courses in the future?
Mr. Chair and Senator Hemphill, so how rising costs might be pricing people out of?
Or incentivizing more students to enroll in online courses as opposed to in person because they aren't able to access housing?
Right, and Mr. Chair and Senator Hemphill, I think, in the LFC brief at the end, we talked a little bit about course delivery. So a number of institutions are tracking how many of their credit hours are delivered online versus traditional. And I think part of the excitement around that when we think about course subscription is that, yeah, you're exactly right. We should be able to broaden that student base by increasing the flexibility. But I don't know that we've drawn that line between course availability and enrollment, unless I'm mistaken.
I'm sorry, my mind was thinking about another part of the question.
So Mr. Chairman and President, my question is, we see rising cost of housing right now and inflation, and that could negatively impact a student's ability to move closer to a university. Are there ways that we could project how that might impact online enrollment, increasing the possibility of having more students looking into more flexible courses where they could access it online and not be limited in terms of housing?
I would say that certainly we at UNM are looking at all of those things. If you, Mr. Chair and Senator Hemphill, we are looking at all of those issues as we think about the best way to deliver education to students where they are. So, but I couldn't say that we've done the predictive analytics to know for sure what housing prices have done to, or could do to encouraging students to get the online education. But I also say that we've got a lot of people working on these very types of questions, so there may be some answers out there that I'm not yet aware of.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My last question is, I know that there are some really established online school programs, particularly K-12, that's my area, that have really high success rates. I've talked to parents who've had their children enrolled in these online programs and felt like the curriculum was presented in a really creative way, and the students were really engaged and able to go at their own pace. And I was wondering, I know that through the pandemic, at the beginning of the pandemic, everyone was kind of forced to make this really quick shift without having any training on how to do that. Mm-hmm. And is there any research happening currently that any of you are aware of that could improve the quality of the online courses so that we're improving the success rate that students experience with the online courses?
Mr. Chair and Senator Hemphill, I would say there is ongoing research on how to most effectively create these courses and increase student learning. Our Center for Teaching and Learning is actively engaged in those efforts. We have trained, I'm going to say, 1,500 faculty on how to create effective online courses, and we've seen a lot more interest in being able to be flexible in the ways in which faculty are delivering education for our students. So I think there's ongoing research all over the country, maybe all over the world, but certainly I'm aware that we have people who are looking at those things.
And briefly, thank you, President Stokes. Great question, Senator Correa Hemphill. I'd like to invite Chancellor Arvizu, I think, just to make a quick comment on that as well.
Okay. Is he making a face behind me?
No, it was all thumbs up, President.
Yeah, Mr. Chair and Senator Correa Hemphill, very, very quickly, I think all of us are looking at the changing in the way instruction will occur. Primarily, I think for remote learning, which we tend to label as online, it really is remote learning, and it's not, it doesn't change necessarily the pedagogy that goes along with online instruction. Online instruction is a real well-developed, researched area that there's a certain way in which you do it, a fully online program. There's a lot of research on that, and that programs, I think, are starting to evolve in New Mexico, and I think, as I've mentioned in previous hearings, there's an untapped potential for New Mexico students who are taking online courses from third-party providers. If you were to just put a soundbite with that, what we're doing as a state is we are exporting revenue and we're importing student debt. We need to fix that. There's 55,000 students, according to the Secretary of Education, Higher Ed in New Mexico, and we want to capture some of that market. So that's part of the deal. Now, where President Stokes and I are on the traditional side, right now in our community colleges, we're like 80-20. 80% of our courses are being offered online, and 10% or 20% are offered face-to-face. Coming into the next year, it'll be 60-40, so 60 face-to-face, 40. But there's more and more appetite and interest in these online or remote learning, I'll call them, for this purpose.
Right.
And that requires, again, the research that we're talking about, because that is different in terms of learning by the students, but it isn't completely comparable to the online programs that are very, very different. They're costed differently, the business models are different, and we need to, I think, look at them separately like that. But there is a tremendous amount of appetite. If I were to add one more comment, it is in the future, maybe a decade from now, this will be the norm. Every higher ed institution has got to figure out how to meet students where they are, whether it's remote learning, whether it's online, or whether it's traditional. And I think there will be a mix of all of those in all of our institutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chancellor. And Mr. May, do you have anything?
Just a brief comment. There are some collaboratives going on around this issue with universities working together. There are many of them, but the Association of College University, or AQ Educators, I know they're in with some institutions within New Mexico. Their research is really solid about evidence-based practices that work and others. So I think supporting and encourage those cross-institution collaboratives can really help facilitate that.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator. Great questions. Next, we'll go to Senator Kernan.
Thank you. Hear me. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the great presentation. It's so good to see all of you. And my first question is for Mr. May. We've talked about efficiencies and how important it is for universities and colleges to be efficient. They're losing enrollment everywhere across the country. Are you seeing, and I think I read somewhere that some of our universities and colleges are being absorbed and combined with other colleges and universities in this environment. Can you tell me how prevalent that is? And, you know, I don't see that happening in New Mexico, but some really major colleges are falling and going under other universities.
Yeah, and I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but particularly among liberal art, religious based institutions, we are seeing a lot of consolidation occurring. among those, again, mostly private institutions across the country. You are seeing some other types of consolidation where it makes sense with individuals. I'll just speak, when at Dallas, we had 8 community colleges separately accredited. We now have 1. We consolidated those into a single institution in order to better leverage our resources and meet the needs. I say that it works. I don't recommend that for everybody. It depends on the geography and what the programs and what's there. Other cases, it makes sense. You're seeing it, even collaboratives at different places between technical institutes and community colleges to make that. And there are a number of those underway right now across the country. But I think the key issue there is most of those, not all of them, it wasn't the case in Dallas, some of those end up with kind of a gun to their head, if you would, to make that happen, when I really think there's greater opportunity through shared services, collaborative of operation, working jointly, seeing the student as a pathway that goes through where we work together. Because when you start combining, you also can take away options that are there, and options are a good thing. That's why the state of New Mexico invests in so many different institutions of higher education. So how do we leverage that, but also avoid some of the things that I see as quite unnecessarily don't add a lot of value to it. In fact, shared and working collaboratively can increase that. And I think there's some things, even I will say something that President Stokes mentioned earlier that is not insufficient or not insignificant in terms of thinking about things like efficiency of classroom assignment and management of course offerings and what's there. But yet the technology for that it's really clunky, quite frankly, for the most part, because it's trying to do 4 things at once within that. And I think if working collaboratively across the state, there are really some things that could be done together rather than each institution having to figure that out on their own to avoid some of these in desperation attempts to save an institution, force a merger, when in fact collaboration that is done on really focused on the needs of student success, equity, helping achieve those goals can frankly leverage existing resources, be much more efficient, and have, I think, a better outcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that. I think just kind of a wake-up call for everybody to pay attention to how you can be efficient and collaborate. I'm looking at page 16 and 17 on your student success and all the opportunities that you're providing, especially for the tutoring and academic support. And I think that's so necessary right now. But Mr. Chairman and President Stokes, have you seen, following the closure of our K-12 schools, as those students are moving into higher ed, I know we talked about this before, preparing for the remedial needs of those students, are you seeing that come to fruition? In other words, are those students coming in prepared? It looks like you're providing opportunity to kind of get them where they are, to reduce those with, where you withdraw from class or you're failing class. Can you just real briefly just say kind of where you are as a university and those students that you're getting now in the freshman class?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Senator Kernan. We knew this was coming, and so we have put a number of things in place that include having students come to campus earlier. We've set up opportunities for students to enter into some of these classes depending upon how they're doing differently, so that they, for example, only they can earn, if I remember the example that I heard about recently, 1 credit hour. There's a 3 credit hour math class, but they can take it 1 credit hour at a time. So if they're having trouble with one area, they don't flunk the whole class. So we have put a lot of things in place to try to help our students be successful, but we've known this was coming. We actually had active conversations with the the Albuquerque Public Schools Superintendent and CNM's president to talk about what are we going to do to be ready. And so it's coming just as we expected. And so there have been a number of things that are part of these student services and interventions that are intended to help try to mitigate the impact of lost learning.
Well, I think that's really important. Thinking about tracking students and where they go to work, I don't remember if we've been able to track students that graduate a New Mexico high school and they leave the state. Are we able to determine how many we lose, how many go out of state, or is that something we're able to do at this point? Connor, you may know that.
There is a way to get, if I could, yeah, but it's some of that, but.
Do we?
We do have a small data set from the National Student Clearinghouse that does track that, where we're starting to more regularly track student college going rates. We used to have one of the highest rates in the country. That's fallen over the last decade, and it fell precipitously during the pandemic as well.
So, Mr. Chair, not just leaving the state, but just not going to college is what I think I hear you say.
Correct.
On that.
So I can go
Okay.
in and look at Rio Rancho High and tell
Okay.
all the colleges that they're going to, both in-state and out-of-state.
Thank you. One of the things, and I think this committee heard me talk about this before, in southeast New Mexico with our community colleges and eastern New Mexico University, we've begun collaborating, and that's a really important thing as our students leave the two-year schools and move into hopefully a four-year school in the state. We're kind of focusing on Eastern right now because we want to keep them from going to Texas Tech. And so if we can make that process better and easier, which I think we're doing, it's not just about the transfer of credits, it's about the acceptance of those credits to reach a degree. I mean, you can transfer and get credit for everything, but if it doesn't move toward a degree, you're really not. You're wasting your time and your money. So I appreciate the work of Dr. Caldwell. Thank you, and our community colleges for working on that. I think it's going to be a model for the rest of the state if it's successful, and we'll see how that goes over the next few years. Wanted to just ask real quickly, Mr. Chair and President Stokes, what does it cost to educate a medical student? You know, it's real easy to say we need more slots, but it is not easy to fund that. Am I correct?
You are, Mr. Chair and Senator Kernan, you are correct that medical education is expensive to deliver. I don't have a dollar figure on the exact cost, but I am happy to get you that information.
I'd just be interested. And we would love to be able to do it. We have a lot of money right now, don't we? Maybe
I
we
wish
could
I
do
had that,
for 4
I wish I
years.
had that figure at
Okay.
the top of mind, but I will be sure
We
to
need
get
to
that
do
for you.
I want clarification, Mr. Chair, and this is for Connor or for Dr. Rommel. The certificates, the non-credit bearing certificates, they are not covered by the Opportunity Scholarship, or they are?
They are not. So it'll
thought they
be
were.
credit-bearing programs covered by Opportunity.
But non-certificates. When I voted for that bill, I thought it covered certificates.
Thank you, Senator. We've noted that question. I think we want to make sure that we also ask that question of Dr. Rommel
Right.
today and
Okay,
get.
we'll have a chance.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
All right, I'll leave that alone. Since I have this group here, I'm going to go off topic just for a minute because I know Senator Stewart's doing the same thing over in K-12. So I've said this to my universities, schools of education before. In order for you all to get students who are ready to go to work at the four-year schools, we have to prepare them correctly in K-12. And we're not doing that. Our teachers are coming out of the schools of education and they are not teaching the science of reading. I don't believe, and I think Senator Stewart would agree with me. So they're leaving the schools of education and then they're having to take professional development courses. They're using letters, and that program has made a huge difference in the state of Mississippi. And if you just Google why Mississippi NAEP scores have done this, it's because of the professional development that they have received in the science of teaching reading, letters in particular. So I going to keep asking why the schools of education are not able to teach the science of teaching reading, because if we don't do that, our literacy is never going to reach the level it needs to be for our kiddos, and you will never get the kind of students that you need to get at the university level. So just a thought, you don't, if you want to answer, you can briefly, but I know we need to move on, but I'm going to keep asking.
Mr. Chair, Senator Kernan, I'll be very brief. We have hired a faculty member in the science of reading and are adding additional resources in our College of Education and Human Sciences for this very purpose. So we are moving there. Curricula is owned by faculty, and so those are the things that we grapple with as leaders of institutions trying to drive the ways in which we educate. But we are actively working on that. And a medical education appears to be between $40,000 and $60,000 a year.
Just curious, thank you for that. So thank you for your response on that. We're going to keep working on that. We've got to improve New Mexico students as they go forward. One last question. Stuff happens. I thought that was really interesting, and I really appreciate why you need to do something like that. But I think we have to be really careful as our students actually go to work in the real world. You can't go to your principal and say, I couldn't do my lesson plan, stuff happens. They're going to want you to do that lesson plan. So just want to be careful that we balance that. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator.
I love that.
Representative Art.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I have one more thing. I'm so sorry. I have to introduce our new president of New Mexico Junior College, Dr. Derek Moore, right here by Dr. McClure. Could we just say welcome to New Mexico? He is from Arkansas. We're so proud to have him at NMJC.
Welcome to New Mexico. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Connor, do you know how many students we graduate in New Mexico from high schools with associate's degrees?
I do not. And
I would love to
I
know
have-
what that is. I'm going to be quick and to the point because we're running out of time. So I love the idea of starting a pathway from 8th grade moving forward. I think we've been dabbling in that a little bit, but I think we really need to push that through. The other thing is I was asking in the last meeting we were at in Roswell about the nursing programs, how there's different requirements at different colleges. And I asked the secretary to get back to me. She was working on it, but I haven't heard anything yet. And if she comes in before us, I'll ask again. But I'm getting reports in my community where they have to take this test before they go into the college. If they don't pass it, then they don't get in. And then when they graduate, they take it again, and it's $80-some every time, and they can only take it twice a year, and blah, blah, blah. So if we want more nurses to graduate, get into college and graduate, we need to deal with that issue. So I don't know if it's been dealt with or not. The other part of it, I think the collaboration part, Mr. Chairman, is are we working with industry to find out what are we lacking? What do you need? Do we need architects? Do we need engineers? What do we need? And are we collaborating with the industry to find out what the needs are of the state of New Mexico? One of the things, Mr. Chairman, that I believe, one of the reasons that technical and vocational may not be attending colleges is because of the atmosphere there. And they may be attending like a different entity to get that education, like, for instance, Associated Builders and Contractors in Albuquerque, to get their certificate. And I know they work with C&M. But I think that one thing that we could do is to work directly with the industry to find out. And are you doing that, President Stokes? Can you tell me if UNM is?
Mr. Chair and Representative Armstrong, more and more, we are doing exactly that. We've had, it's been in pockets. Our Anderson School is doing some wonderful work there. Engineering has as well. I didn't mention our 2040 Opportunity to Define Plan, but part of that specifically is focused on building those opportunities and those connections with the workforce needs. We do, in fact, evaluate that as we think about degree programs. Our Bieber Institute tracks, the needs of the state, but we're talking about getting much more into the weeds with defining those career paths for students that meet the needs of industry, and we're really looking to partner with. At the state level and locally, we've actually, we're actively engaged in doing some of that work now.
Okay, thank you very much. I was interested, Mr. Chairman, on this, the pages 11 and 12, where it shows the online issues and the dropping the class rate. And so
Yes.
I'm really impressed with all the work that you did to put into this. And I appreciate the honesty. I feel like, knowing where you need to work, and appreciate that you're willing to do that. And appreciate your report as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative Armstrong. Next is Co-Chair Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I will be quick because I think we ran out of time. Thank you to Dr. Stokes and Dr. May and, of course, Connor. And I want to say hello also back there to Dr. Rowley, again, my Santa Fe Community College. All right, quickly, Mr. Chairman. I think Dr. May, initially, when you started, Dr. May, you brought up a very key point that I think we all need to finally come to reality here, to come to the realistic picture of where things are, that we have and in your words, a change of methodology by which we are calculating enrollment and all of that. And that had to do with certificates. And it's true. We tend to have this mentality, at least many of us, that a certificate is really less than going for a higher education. And in some cases, yes, we do believe that the higher the education, the better, right? But, we should have been taught by the actual numbers and what is happening in reality out there, that enrollment for ongoing in colleges is going down, but certificates and job growth, where businesses are calling and reducing their requirements because they're calling for certificates and saying, we accept a certificate for this or that, and people are running for that because there are a lot of things that impact their lives, from families now with COVID, increases in home prices, lack of home resources, even substance abuse issues, mental health issues, whatever it may be. So they're running for those things they can do quickly and still get a decent, hopefully at least minimum wage. We would like for more, but if they can get that at least, where's the impetus for these people to have to go for higher education? And so I think we need to come to grips with that. But and Dr. May, I said to my notes, see page 10, just quickly here for the time. It says that states, having to do with certificates, states must get better at helping learners be able to understand the jobs and how they can connect to those jobs. I guess one of the questions, quick questions and brief answer is, how are we going to focus on connecting these students to jobs for certificates or higher enrollment or both? Or is there any plan for that at all, considering where the paradigm is?
Yeah, and let me clarify that
Yes,
if I could,
please.
Senator. One, I think our universities, for the most part, have done a really good job with their degrees of connecting students into that, but I don't think we've done it at other levels. And I think particularly certifications and other short-term, we've kind of left it up to the student to navigate, because if it's not on the data radar, it's also really not been built in as part of the operation. And I can tell you, with some work that's gone on in some places, it's not any different than the same types of connections that are taking place. I will say, too, that we really haven't fully leveraged the technology at that level, while I suspect Handshake and other platforms are being used all across the state to connect students to jobs. That's not true among many of the certifications in that area. So if I could be a little clearer in terms of what I was meaning there.
Thank you very much, Dr. May. And just a quick point here is that initially, or earlier, someone asked I think it was Senator Kernan, asked, are certificates covered by the scholarship, the opportunity scholarship? And they are covered. There were certain limitations, okay? Their certificates, most trades certificates are covered. So we want to make sure that we get that clear. And there's some certificates, for example, for like individual, and Charles, thank you, Charles, was just giving me an example. For example, Ford, if somebody wants to work at Ford and there's a certificate required just for Ford, no. But other trades are. For example, if you go to auto mechanics at a college, you get a certificate, for example, that would be covered. So just wanted to make sure that we cleared that. That's correct me, Charles, if I'm wrong. Yes, you bet. And then, yeah, no worries. And then also, just final point, because of time, I first want to thank you for all your efforts. We've been hit with tremendous challenges. And it seems like these changes and challenges, for some reason, we feel that they came all at once. And the pandemic didn't help any, and that kind of served to wake us up too. So here we are. But let me ask this final question quickly, and we'll go on. Is that I know that the universities, higher education here, submitted a plan per the requirement of the legislature to obtain your full funding, to see how you were going to work and change the enrollment patterns that are happening. In your responses, you said something to this effect, okay? In your responses, you said, by 2025, we will increase it by 7%. It will be increased by 7%. By 2027, it will be increased by 10%, I think it was. But even if you did all of that, even if by that time things will probably change and we're going to need more resources and ways to do things. But even if you changed it, there's still 44,000 students less than it would be, than it should be. I guess if we go back to the initial numbers we had. So that's not counting adding and the additional applications for student enrollment. So I guess I just wonder, what happened to the 44,000? Is anybody looking at it to see what we're going to do with those? I mean, we're short. We need to figure something out to bring it, make it whole again, So any brief response, and we will move on. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Chair and Senator Rodriguez, on the 44,000, so that's the difference we would, if all the institutions got to their enrollment projections by 2027, it leaves that there's that 44,000 student gap. And I think that when President Stokes mentioned, for example, UNM's facilities plan, part of the impetus to reduce square footage on campuses, for example, that's why that's happening. That's why the higher education department right now has a space policy that says you can't have a net increase in square feet. So you build something, you got to tear something down, and it's to address that. Essentially, those students that we think are probably not going to come back, we might not hit those peak enrollment levels again.
And I, thank you for that. If there's any other brief answers, we do want to get to Dr. Ramo also, as we get a kind of.
Thank you. And unless, again, I agree, because of time, so. Anybody? No? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to defer any other questions because of time. Thank you all for that.
Thank you very much to the panelists. If you want to, please stay around. Obviously, there'll be lunch after this. Dr. Ramo, maybe Mr. Jorgensen, you can also move one to the side. Dr. Ramo, we want to invite you and your team up. We're going to switch out. Yeah.
That's my cue.
We're going to try to do a hard stop, probably around 12:20 at this point, between 12:15 and 12:20. And while we're getting situated, as everybody knows, the funding formula is one of the core directives for us as a subcommittee, is to consider changes. We've made some ad hoc changes in the past legislative session, seem to be working relatively well. but this would be considering much more substantial and longer lasting. So, if folks, yeah, feel free to take any conversations outside. We're going to go kick it off. Dr. Rommel, please take us through where we are with the committee that you're helping to lead, looking at funding formula updates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Co-Chair. I want to make sure the members have this handout. It's a one-page, both sides. On the front, we're going to start with the higher education funding formula. First of all, my name is Harry Rommel. I'm the Institutional Finance and Financial Aid Director at the Higher Education Department. Secretary Rodriguez sends her regards and regrets that she couldn't join you today. She is at the Government Tribal Summit with Governor Lujan Grisham and our tribal leaders. So I am here in her stead. In the interest of time, I am going to go very quickly over these 4 points on the agenda that you had asked for. First, on the higher education funding formula priorities, we have a list of things that are on the table for the technical group to discuss and bring to our steering committee and Secretary Rodriguez later. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I do want to touch on a couple important ones because they're germane to what we talked about earlier. The at-risk student measure in the funding formula is currently based on Pell Grant eligibility. And as Chancellor May mentioned, we have a steep decline in male Hispanic enrollment at our institutions. We want to look at expanding the at-risk measure to take a look at some of these other things that really make a student at risk. And Dr. Pendergrass said, maybe we shouldn't look at them as at risk, but we should look at them as at promise. But we do want to definitely look at those other factors. Are you first-time college going? Those other risk factors other than just purely financial. So we're looking at those data elements. Some we can't do this year, but the data advisory group is looking at how we can get that type of data, such as first-time college going status. To Representative Chatfield's point, we do want to include additional workforce measures in the funding formula and fund those. Right now, STEM and healthcare are our proxy for those workforce measures. We do want to add education or discuss adding education and social work. Those are, of course, 4-year and graduate degrees. And other high-demand workforce credentials to parallel with what we're doing with the Opportunity Scholarship. To your question, Representative Chatfield, many of those certificates are credit-bearing, such as the CDL program at San Juan or the Automotive Technology program at Junior College. Many of them are. A lot of those non-credit workforce certificates are funded by employers, and that's why they're non-credit. And I can tell you this, if my friends behind me know that there's money available for their students and for their institution because they can offer a credit-bearing certificate, they're going to do that. So I think we'll see a trend of more credit-bearing certificates for these workforce-appropriate credentials. So I hope that addresses your concern. I'm going to move on to addressing per-student funding disparities. And the current funding formula cannot, except over long periods of time, address the differences in ING dollars per full-time student or total revenue dollars available to an institution per full-time student. You'd have to run the ING formula at the current levels for decades before everybody was getting the same amount of money per outcome. And then as far as the agency's priority for how we discuss the formula and bring proposed changes forward, we want to continue to collaborate. We want to reach as much consensus as we can with our higher education partners. We don't want to go it alone. We want to reward institutions for improving. We want to focus on student success. And, of course, we want to make sure that we avoid any unintended consequences of changes to the formula. We saw some of those with the base redistribution in prior years. So those are sort of guiding principles. If you go to the next page, I'm not going to go through the side-by-side of the lottery and opportunity scholarships again. You've seen this before, but I did want you to know that the final rule for the opportunity scholarship was published on July 12th. I think we've done a really good job of making sure that there's a symmetry between the lottery scholarship for recent high school students and returning adults on the opportunity side, and how we make these scholarships work together and not conflict with each other. I'm happy to follow up with other questions. And then, of course, the big question is, how much is the opportunity scholarship going to cost? And our FIR for Senate Bill 140 was about $85 million. We do not know yet how tuition and enrollment is going to affect that that change. Now, right now, we're at a very broad level of uncertainty in what that cost is going to be. As data comes in, for example, in September, we'll have the FY22 financial aid data. That uncertainty is going to narrow. And then when we get the fall draw, it's going to narrow even further. You know, I've been working very closely with our higher education institutions on getting as close as we can to an estimate. That estimate is on Secretary Rodriguez's desk for review. She is going to be sharing that with the executive and the LFC in the coming weeks. So that's where we're at. We do have, you know, our $75 million appropriation. We also have over $25 million in fund balance transfers available. We are committed as an agency to funding 100% of eligible tuition and fees in the coming fiscal year. And then finally, again, in the interest of time, I want to have time for questions. Just to remind you that we do a lot of constituent services. I can tell you that my staff has been fielding a lot of calls on the Opportunity Scholarship. And in addition to all of our other programs, we do have an online resource for your constituents, reachhighernm.com, that can really help guide them through that process. It's a really easy to use, helpful resource. You can do career exploration. How does the scholarship work? Am I eligible for lottery? Am I eligible for opportunity? And those types of things. And I'm just going to keep it right there and keep it brief and stand for any questions that we may have in the last 2 minutes before you want to take lunch.
Thank you, Dr. Allen. Lightning round. We're going to start with Representative Chatfield.
Okay, I'll go fast. Tell me just quickly how funding is considered for these things. At Mesa Lands, we have wind and solar, and Pattern Energy is wanting those graduates, those people that have certificates, they have a job as soon as they leave. Clovis Community College, we have welding classes that are 2 years out. Are they funded? How are they funded, or how are they considered? Plumbing, electrical. When my son went to college, one of his friends went to learn how to climb poles. And by the time the other kids got out of college, the boy was married, had a child, and climbing poles, had money coming in, was a working member of society. Can you speak to that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, Representative Chatfield. Certificates of those types are not brought forward to the department for review. We do not review those. So the way they're funded is they get money from ING, and they get money from other sources of revenue, such as the mill levy. It is the board and the executive leadership at that institution to decide what programs they're going to create and bring forward. But in terms of what we incentivize certificates, or through the Opportunity Scholarship, we may, in the future funding formula, incentivize some of those workforce credentials. But ultimately, how those programs are developed and determined is at the institutional level.
So, Mr. Chairman, I believe we need to look at funding these certificates such, these kids have a job when they leave school. Let's get them working. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any final questions? Okay.
Yes, please.
Please, absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so any answers on the nursing programs?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Chair, Representative Armstrong. Our review committee scored all of the nursing applications. Now, I should ask a clarifying question. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. Are we talking about the issue at ENMU Roswell with the exams or the nurse expansion funding?
I'm talking about men and women trying to get into the nursing program and the difference of the application process and the graduation process at different universities.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Armstrong, I'm not prepared to address that at this time. That would be in our policy shop. I'm sort of the finance guy. I do want to give you a very quick update on where we are with the nurse expansion dollars that you appropriated. We've had all of the applications have scored. They were all extremely compelling applications. We are looking at ways that we can fund every single institution that applied for nursing dollars, and that will help because those types of services are going to help those students in terms of succeeding and getting in and passing their NCLEX. So those activities will be rolling out with this funding. We hope to have a recommendation to the Secretary by mid-next week and an award, if at all possible, or award letter at the end of the week.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for those answers. And this has to do, one of the tests is called, I believe, the HESI test, and colleges are requiring before entrance to pass it, and if they don't, then they don't get in.
And Mr. Chairman, Representative, I will definitely follow up as soon as I talk to the secretary about
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Rommel. I think that will conclude today. Thank you all for making the trip down to Silver City or over to Silver City in those cases. Dr. Rommel, thanks to you, the secretary, your understaffed team. We hope that you are able to fill some of, to add to that team. We know that's important. And we'll be in very close contact with folks as we finish out this subcommittee here over the next few months.
it. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and we'll take all the help we can get.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Jorgens. Thank you. All right.
Are we adjourned?
We are adjourned.